Okay, my clock says 1:30 now, so I'll call the special, this is the special committee of the whole meeting to order. This meeting's primarily to review our quarterly reports, and we do have a in-camera portion at the end, and we are meeting this afternoon on the territories of the Skokomish Nation. First, we have a presentation from the Nicholas Sonntag Marine Education Centre, and we need to approve the agenda before we get to that. Moved by Councillor Kroll, seconded Councillor DeAndrade. All those in favour? The motion carries. And Jenny Wright and Vicky Raw are here. And I see Uni Claridge as well.
Okay, let's see if we can make this work. Yay. Hi everyone. So those of you who don't know me, my name is Jenny Wright. I am the curator at the Nicholas Sonntag Marine Education Centre, and I'm going to just do a brief overview of our Healthy Harbour report from 2022 and look at our work plan for this coming year in 2023. So just a very quick overview of the Healthy Harbour project, just in case someone isn't familiar with it. So it's an environmental community partnership between ourselves at the Marine Education Centre and the town of Gibsons, and we have been doing this project since 2019. So we're coming into our 5th year of this, and there's 3 tiers to this in order for us to support the natural asset management of Gibsons Harbour and the town's recreational water lease. So the 3 main tiers are data gathering, policy recommendations, and community education. And our main focus in all of these tiers has been the eelgrass, which we find just right out in our harbour in the shallow waters of the subtidal area. And all of these feed in to each other. The data gathering informs the policy recommendations and informs all of our education programmes that we have at the Marine Education Centre. So why eelgrass? Why did we pick eelgrass? It provides very important infrastructure services, such as protecting against storm surge, erosion and flood. So the roots of the eelgrass stabilise soft sediment to help against erosion, and the long blades, which can get up to about 2 metres, help to diminish wave action and helps us protect against storm surge and floods. And then also has the added benefits of being a carbon sink, so they're a photosynthesising underwater plant. So they do sequester carbon and also provide really important biodiversity habitat for about 80% of commercially important species. And due to it being so important, we have decided to try and conserve and protect our local eelgrass beds, as we do have quite prevalent beds along in front of Armours towards the harbour and at the breakwater area. So we have been working this year to protect, as it is a cost-effective way to look after our eelgrass. And the hope is that if we've got the protection in place first, that we can then start restoration projects that would have more chance of being successful because they're already protected. So what did we do in 2022? So we actually installed, you might have seen them, just in front of Chiquelp in the Armours Beach area. We installed 5 voluntary no anchor moorings to try and donate where the eelgrass is in that area and prevent boaters from anchoring or mooring in that eelgrass, because it is very, very damaging to that fragile habitat. So we finalised the placement of these buoys in early 2022 with the help of Sea Change Marine Conservation. We had divers in the water making sure that they weren't going to impact the eelgrass itself, of course, and make sure that it wasn't impacting on any current moorings as well. Once those 5 were finalised, we then also held a community engagement event in February of 2022. This was virtual, as we were still very much in COVID times, but we had a great turnout. This was just an opportunity for us to inform our community and our locals about this project, and also share stories of Gibsons Harbour and its past, present and future is what we called it. So we had really great turnout. We had a discussion and question portion at the end, and I'm happy to say that all feedback about the proposed marker buoys was very, very positive. So we went ahead and got all of the equipment, and the installation took place in June of 2022. And again, that was with the help of Sea Change Marine Conservation. It was their divers, they have the experience in that because they had already installed a similar conservation zone at Mannion Bay on Bowen Island, so they helped us out immensely with the installation process. Then throughout the summer, NSMEC staff and volunteers were monitoring the area, looking out for any boats that might be infracting on the area. Somewhat happy to say that we only had one occurrence of someone where they appeared to moor up to one of the buoys, but after a quick chat and learning what it was, that stopped, which was great. So they seem to have been really, really successful. And we did have a slight issue where we had to relocate 2 of the buoys just due to the tide and miscalculation of placement. But that was very quickly rectified, I'm happy to say. So what we learned from our 2022 season, although we didn't do any full surveying just due to placing those buoys in the conservation zone and kind of funding restrictions due to that, we did do some casual observations while we had divers in the water, because it's a good opportunity. And they did note that there was still lots of biodiversity. It was still a very healthy habitat at the Armours Beach area. So very worth protecting, but also very worth some restoration activities taking place, as there is still some human impact present, especially at the breakwater area, which is that bottom picture. Just down there, there is quite a lot of logging and wood debris, as well as kind of anthropogenic debris present in the water there. So restoration and cleanup activity is something that we want to focus on. And then so far, the location of the buoys has been very successful, as I said. Eelgrass is still present up to the limit of where it can grow in our area, which is really, really good. So, what happens next? Our plan for 2023, we actually recently just got some funding from Pacific Salmon Foundation, some additional funding to perform a subtidal cleanup in the harbour and eelgrass beds around Gibsons. And we're very fortunate that Freedom Diving Systems is also helping us out and donating some of their time to help us get that going, get divers in the water. And we're hoping that that will happen in March, so very soon, actually. We've also been talking with the Hackeye Institute to grow our monitoring programmes, and they have a programme that is called the Sentinels Light Trap programme, and it looks at Dungeness megalope, so basically looking for juvenile Dungeness, getting counts and population, and this is then going to feed into looking at advising fisheries like quotas for Dungeness crab in the future. So they are coming out in March as well to do some training with us and to get that project set up, and they have kindly donated some of the equipment so that we can actually get that set up. We're also looking at other citizen science and volunteer-led monitoring that can take place throughout the 2023 season, as well as looking at doing some further mapping of our eelgrass bed and surveying. The last full mapping that happened was in 2019, I believe. Just due to constraints of getting cameras out there, it's quite hard. We're talking with Freedom Diving Systems and hoping to get their ROV in the water at some point this year. And we will be ongoing with our maintenance of our conservation zone and those buoys as well, and working with all of our stakeholders. So just some further considerations to continue to have a vibrant and healthy harbour here in Gibsons. We'll continue to support the town's planning staff and share all of our data and our information that we collect. We will continue to apply for additional funding, which I'm going to talk about briefly in the next slide as well as looking at creating a harbour guide for boat users, working with the harbour staff as well, just so we can give out that information and boaters can become aware of these eelgrass conservation zones as more and more are coming and popping up. We also want to continue our restoration activities. We did one restoration at the beginning of 2022 with sea change again, so we want to be going out, doing more restoration and being able to monitor that as well. And then we will create and implement further monitoring programmes and cleanup programmes, which leads me into this slide. So some of our dream programmes that we want to set up for 2023 in order to grow and expand this project, because it is an amazing project and there's so much that can be done. After talking with the Squamish Nation, they identified bivalves, specifically cockles and clams, as being a species of importance to them. And then looking into it, there's actually quite a big data gap, especially within the Gibsons Howe Sound, for population health of bivalves. And they're a key indicator species. So this is something that would be really, really important. And we're looking at hopefully funding dependent, talking with stakeholders and universities to set up a really solid methodology so we can get a monitoring programme set up for that. I also talked briefly about wanting to increase our mapping and our surveying of the eelgrass. Again, ROVs are not easy to come by and easy to drive, apparently. So we're looking at getting funding so that we can expand the mapping and actually expand it round to the Georgia and Pebbles Beach areas where we know there's eelgrass, but there's not much data on that eelgrass. Third one is our monitoring for European green crab. This is an invasive species that has been found more and more on our coast. And if it was to establish in the Gibsons Howe Sound, it would be detrimental to our eelgrass. It has actually been found as close as Pender Harbour, not in any great numbers, luckily, but it is really important that we try and set up some monitoring for that. We're talking with DFO at the moment to identify good areas to monitor. But again, equipment and monitoring and bodies is not cheap, so we will be looking into funding options for that. And then last one, again, after talking with the Squamish Nation, they identified forage fish as species of importance. They are currently working with the Marine Stewardship Initiative down in Squamish to set up some Pacific herring surveys, and they would really like to partner with us to set some up at this side of the coast. Again, it would take lots of training and we'd need kind of people in the water for that one. So we're looking at what options we have for that. And that is our dream kind of monitoring programmes for the 2023 and coming seasons of the Healthy Harbour project. Yes, thank you so much for listening. And if there's any questions, I will take them now.
I'll start by asking, is the Healthy Harbors, I guess it is in the presentation, but does more broadly the Nicholas Sonntag Marine Center have or is it working with local groups in the Squamish Nation on creek enhancement? Because I know that's a project that's going on at
Yes,
Gibsons
that is
Creek
actually, that's a good point, because it's something I forgot to include. That we have been working with the Squamish Nation, the town and the Sunshine Coast Conservation Association. They have ongoing projects that they're kind of in the middle of funding talks for the Gibsons Creek area. And we have been looking at funding options for kind of filtration and water runoff of that same creek to see if we can work on that, since it is anything that happens upstream is affecting our eelgrass because it is right by the stream. So that is definitely something that is on our radar. And we're currently looking for funding and in talks to see how we can get that started.
Right. Yeah. Thanks. Councillor Thompson.
Jenny, that's just, the work is great. It's tremendous. Yeah, it's fabulous. In regards to the eelgrass protection areas, do these show up on marine navigation mapping like Navionics?
They don't at the moment. It is something we've talked about with the kind of Sea Change, who have kind of installed multiple of these zones at the moment, including Mannion Bay and down in Puget Sound. Because they're voluntary, it's harder to kind of get them onto those systems, but I know that there is a way, and we are working with Sea Change and Marine Stewardship Initiative, because they want some zones put on there, and DFO, to see if we can somehow get those put on and how it works.
Yeah.
Because also boaters use multiple different forms for navigation. So just figuring out which one works for us
Right.
as well.
I know the Navionics program has a community edits
Yeah.
section.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll need to
I'll just
look into
mention
that
that,
some more and we can hopefully get those on some of the major ones as well.
Yeah, great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. Thank you for the presentation, Jenny. With respect to the green crab, I know in other countries where they didn't realize it was going to become a problem until it really became a problem. But one of the solutions they have come up with is developing a commercial market for them. Have you been doing any investigation, sort of touchy-feely out there to see if Smitty's would like to be serving green crab cocktail?
We have not at the moment, just because at the moment our focus is on trying to make sure that they don't become established within the Sound. Because once they do, it is even with like a kind of looking at commercial market, it's really hard to control their population. They, when they kind of are buried, when they have eggs, they have thousands of eggs on one female crab. So they just spread so fast. And they're one of the most adaptable species of crab. So they can live in near freshwater up to really high salinities, and they don't care what temperature the water is. So unfortunately, they can outcompete lots of our like endemic species. So that right now the focus, especially with Defoe, is just to kind of make sure that they don't establish. I know that they have, they are more established up towards the north of Haida Gwaii, I think, and they are doing some intensive trapping, as that is right now the only solution. I don't know if they've looked into commercial kind of avenues for that either. But yeah, the main focus right now is just don't let them establish.
Councillor D'Andrade.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, I'm really pleased with this partnership. I think it's attaining a lot of the town's goals and also the biosphere. So I'm curious with the funding with the green crab, because my understanding is DFO did not pick this area as a site, monitoring site. So, but now you're saying you're applying for funding. So would you still be able to apply for? So what will be the difference?
Yeah, so DFO, although it's not one of the sites that hit all of their key kind of targets for a like specific site for monitoring for the crab, if there's funding available and bodies available, they're happy to give you need to get the licensing and the equipment and things. They're happy for people to be able to start the monitoring programs, because it's not to say that just because it doesn't hit their key kind of their key elements for a monitoring site, it would still be worth monitoring. And we have, since that conversation with them, we have actually identified a site down at Williamson's Landing that would meet all of the criteria. Okay. So I went out and did a site inspection of that and have since talked with DFO, and they would be very happy to move ahead with that. And then if we manage to establish that first site, we're looking at maybe establishing one more towards Armours. It just wouldn't be as, they like places that are kind of more enclosed and like bays, whereas Gibsons Harbour is a lot more open. So yeah, we're looking at what sites qualify, but that's not to say that we can't still get funding, even if they don't hit all the key areas for DFO.
But you haven't heard from them at this point?
I have. They're happy. They would be happy to kind of go ahead if we get the funding. They're like, yes, we will support you.
But they have not secured the funding yet? Okay.
No, not yet. Yeah, we're talking with Ruth and things at the biosphere, because I know that they've also identified spots on Bowen Island, and they're also looking for funding, so we're looking at what options there are.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation and for this fantastic work that you're doing. That the town's really pleased to be a part of this partnership.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
No problem. And now we are starting on our quarterly reports with administration and corporate and legislative services. reports presented as written. I don't know if there are any quick updates or just a quick,
Just
Summary,
through you, Mr. Mayor,
maybe
just a very
we
quick
don't-
summary. Rebecca and I are here to speak to our department's report. Just highlight a couple of things. I always have to remind myself, we're talking about 2022, particularly the last quarter. It's, as you can see on the information in the other reports as well, it was a very busy year. Be a bit of an understatement. But, there was a lot of good things happening and a lot of restart. We have a new mayor and council that we welcome that season too. Also, thankfully, we got some new staff, particularly a new director of engineering, and are expecting a couple more folks to come and support us. That last quarter was also challenging for us because we were thankfully somewhat on the tail end with dealing with that regional water emergency, which the town played a significant role, and try to keep our capital projects moving forward. It's still very active, but as of this morning, we're within striking distance of opening up well 6, and considering all the world supply issues and everything else out there, we're targeting some mid-March as a commissioning date for that well. And our license is in place, so we're in a good spot. And then just the other projects as we work through with council to finalize the budget, then we are gonna try and assemble a more dedicated team to getting these projects going, because we have quite a build-up of running up against deadlines and funding, so we got to spend the money we have in that sense. So it's mostly what I have at the moment, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Rebecca, you want to add anything else? But I'm good on this end.
I don't have much to add to that. I think it was a term of Manny wearing many hats more than usual. And I think for Tracy and myself, adding the election to that, added to the hats that we wore, which absorbed a lot of our time and energy, which is why you're getting Q3 and Q4 rolled together instead of just Q4 and Q3 having come earlier. So that time when Q3 would have been coming due is right when we were wrapping up with the election and producing our final report, which you got on November 1st, and then seeing the new council and the new mayor established and getting you up and running. And the additional meetings. Normally in the meeting reports, I would do a comparison, kind of how we're doing compared to the same quarter before. I didn't this time because it's all so different when you're in the middle of an election. So many meetings were canceled, different meetings were added. So I didn't include that type of information in here, but it still was very busy meeting time, despite the cancellations.
thank you. And I'll comment just from the start on behalf of council, so we don't have to keep doing it every report, but just these reports are very extensive and informative, and I think they're going to be helpful for. I know Councillor Thompson's already commented to me that as a new councillor, she spent like a day going learning from all the information that's in these quarterly reports. So it's just extremely valuable, the information in here, and we greatly appreciate all the work that's gone into these reports. And just an additional comment too. One thing that Rebecca, you didn't mention here of all the different hats people were wearing is you were also interim CAO for quite a period as well. So we thank you for that. Yeah. Any questions on this report, this section of the reports? And that's open to the public as well. Yeah, Councillor D'Andrade.
It's not a question. I just want to corroborate because I really appreciate a report that it's easy reading. So thank you very much. Really good. Yeah.
I'll ask about the assessing and developing a plan to repair the wharf adjacent to Grandma's Pub. I know this might be this was actually mentioned in this report, though I know it might be something infrastructure services might be involved in too, but I'll ask it now since it's mentioned.
So the area we're talking about is the wharf structure, as you know, there, the sort of between School Road and Grandma's Pub, the sort of a road allowance, and that provides access to Grandma's Pub in that space. At one time, the wharf was much wider than it is now, I'm sure you know. In the meantime, that space has aged a fair amount in about, I'd say about 3 years ago, just before COVID, I believe. During one of the inspections from DFO, they noted there was substantial rot in that area. They had some concerns with the stability of the ramp. So we had that reviewed, and the engineering firm that we hired recommended replacing that portion of the wharf. And so we've been working with Grandma's Pub and been expediting some engineering assessments and some designs to rebuild to a stronger structure, and working with DFO because they themselves are doing works to improve the structural stability of the wharf structure itself. So that it's probably still a few months away. I think right now the engineering firm are designing based on the investigations they've done, and we're also using that opportunity. It's a very busy area with a major sewer trunk line that comes through there. We've got water lines, and we've got drainage from School Road in particular. So we'll upgrade where necessary that space, including the boardwalk as you contend there. It's from a sea level rise perspective, we've been talking about the seawall recently in our council meetings, and there's a little section between Grandma's and Smitty's. There's no seawall to speak of. It's just the toe of the hill, and so it gives us an opportunity to raise all of that protection up. So we'll, it's sort of the timing is never great, but we're on it, and we'll have it done as soon as we can.
So the hope is it would be finished in 3 months, or is that still?
The hope is, I suspect we will hear back in probably within a month or sort of what's recommended. And because DFO is doing some work and there are limited numbers of contractors that do that work, we ideally want to piggyback on their mobilization of their contractor and tack on this additional work if we can make that work. But it's to happen this summer, I would say, this spring and summer.
Okay, thank you. I had another question about the Provincial Heritage Registry and that work, the Heritage Conservation Act, and I mean what are the ramifications and next steps for the town in relation to this? Is there any kind of work that this would be page 4 of the report?
They will be looking,
That the town needs to do on this in this area?
it will be coming an opportunity for you to have input and to consult with the municipalities. At this stage, they're still rolling it out. It's still very preliminary. So it came in, I think, several phases. I'm just going to flip to my notes on that. Can find them. Yeah, there were 4 phases. And so phase 1 had 5 themes, and they've completed phase 1. This was at the end of phase 1. So it's still very early days. And the initial beginning of phase 1 was just to consult with Indigenous groups because they are the primary population that's impacted by this in particular, and to look at the protections, decision-making, and resourcing, compliance, and enforcement. So the idea then is to introduce the new legislation sometime in 2024. So it's still very early.
Okay, thank you. And one more question on page 5 regarding FOI. There's a list of requests, and it says work progressed or completed. How many are completed?
Of the ones on this list, 2 are still active.
Oh, great.
And I've only had 1 come in. I feel like knocking on wood, and my superstition kicks in that if I say I haven't gotten any new ones, that will jinx it. I got 1 new one that was very quickly resolved or redirected. So it's been a quiet start to 2023, and I'm
Knock on
Grateful
wood.
for that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so I'll just do a couple of points on my report. So you're going to remember back in Q4, I presented council with a 9-month operational review for 2022. And then shortly after that, staff behind the scenes were working on the interim audit. So our auditors do virtual visits now. So we started that in early or mid-December, getting ready for wrapping up 2022 audit. And they're going to be coming, that's for March, basically spring break they come, well, virtually now, so we're working away at that right now. I want to touch on the COVID funding. So at the end of 2022, based on the preliminary numbers, the remaining balance is just over 775,000. And sounds like a lot, but the funds have been allocated in 2023, some to operations and the majority to funding 2 capital projects, one being the records and information system, management system, and the second one being the renovation to 494 South Fletcher next door. And so we're hoping those are going to be fully spent by the end of this year. I'll just touch on the grants. So as per usual, the grants are listed on page 4 and 5 of my report that shows the ones that have been awarded, and there's been a significant amount of those. I'll just touch on the ones that are pending. So we're hoping for an announcement, public announcement about the active transportation, maybe later this week, ideally. We received word, unfortunately, that we're not successful with Lamont Park. We just got that word recently. And the Strategic Priorities Fund, the $6 million grant, we're still waiting on that, and that should be late June. And the next report will show the new grant application for the foreshore application that council approved or supported last week. Our tax and utility payments, their receivables are very consistent, so really consistent repayment percentages by the taxpayers of Gibsons, which is great. On page 7, I do list the preliminary balances for 2022, and I've got a big star beside those because we're just starting our audit. And so those are near final, but they're going to be maybe some tweaks here and there as we go through the audit process. And I bring you financial statements in April for approval, and we'll talk about 2022 in more depth at that point. I'm also, next week is our first general operations budget for 2023. And in that, you're going to see quite detailed budgets for all of operations for 2023 and through 27. But I'll also provide 2022 preliminary actuals as well. So you're going to see some significant detail there. And so you'll have a lot more information behind those numbers on that one. And then just finally, HR, Human Resources, always incredibly busy, that department. Sophie's working a lot down there. So a lot of activity, not only in staffing, but also health and safety, a lot of accomplishments in the quarter. And then there's a list of also things on her list that she wants to do when she has time in the future. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
So thorough. I have a little tiny question. The COVID Safe Restart Community Grant, the $20,000 that has the $1,000 max, we're at $7,500. Is that closed now, or do the remaining funds, does that go back into the whole restart program? The remainder of the
Yes.
20,000?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so last year, council approved a total of $20,000. And of that, it was less intake than the year before. Things are sort of winding down, I think, from the pandemic point of view. So we are able to award $7,500. The remainder just goes back in the COVID pot, and that's the $775,000 that's available. So council could choose to allocate some of that money. The majority has been allocated. There's a little bit of wiggle room I've got in there for potential overages on the capital program. It's really narrow, but there's always a bit of wiggle room. And I have allocated, I think it was 140 for ops for 2023, but I'll speak to that next week. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Any questions from the audience? Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to know about the expenditures for sewer. In that the Press Road lift station, I think we took a loan out for about 1.7 for the Press Road lift station, and I don't really see. Oh, sorry. I think I have a pretty loud
Have that one
voice.
at the top working automatically now, or? know how-
Anyway, I don't really see it itemized here, but I noted in the infrastructure report that they had to spend a whole bunch of money trying to fix a generator. And I'm wondering if that came out of the capital costs that we borrowed, or if we're now above what we borrowed and we're now dipping into other funds for the Prowse Road lift station. Is that clear? Am I making myself clear?
The Director of Infrastructure Services just walked in. He might be able to help with this one too, but didn't hear the whole question. Yeah, I'd imagine a repair wouldn't be part of what the loan was, because that would be maintenance that just needs to be covered over the,
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, I
Maintenance
wonder
budget,
if,
yeah.
have we spent all of the money we borrowed on the Prowse Road lift station?
or
I
the
guess that's-
upgrade. Yeah, has
For
the
the
upgrade,
upgrade?
has the upgrade been completed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So we borrowed, authorized to borrow $1.76 million for Prowse Road. It was also a section of Forest Main as well. And we have borrowed, or remaining that's not, that was not needed for the Prowse Road or that smaller section of Forest Main was $267,000. So that debt is still available for any future work on that Forest Main, but the Prowse Road upgrade is done, no more debt needed for that. And the generator costs were from ops, for sure. Yeah.
Thanks. Other question? Oh, another elaboration here.
For Mrs. Bonkoff's completeness of answers to that question, I think this what happened in the summer with the station that we were working on was a part of the generator that failed, and it wasn't so much related to the capital works that we had done earlier over the previous couple of years, and we just completed the archaeology aspect of it. Actually took quite a bit of time. Before it's worth, it was not so much a sensor, but a part within that. It wasn't doing its job. It eventually took a bit to track that down, but the manufacturer then provided us with a new part, and it's been working much better.
So there was no warranty on it? It was the part that we bought for the reconstruction or the rebuild?
I don't know about the warranty. I don't believe so.
Yeah.
That it was just, yeah. out
Just
of that
curious.
Director of
structure.
Finance.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can't speak to the warranty, but I am pursuing potential recovery of the cost under our insurance program. We have an equipment breakdown, and because that generator was brought, it was a separate purchase, a separate project to the Prowse Road upgrade station. It was bought slightly before that started. But because it's so new, I want to see if I can pursue through insurance to see if we can recover some of those costs. I'm just actually gonna put that paperwork in either today or tomorrow. And fingers crossed, it's worth a shot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. And we're on to Infrastructure Services.
I'm used to red being on. The Infrastructure Services Department is responsible for managing both natural and engineered assets, delivering the services that those assets provide.
I know you weren't here for the beginning, but we're just summaries is good. Like everybody's read the report, so.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, if there's any highlights or summaries,
sure.
yeah.
I can be brief.
Doesn't need to be all read out, I don't think. Everyone's read the reports, right? Yeah, good.
So Q4 was highlighted by some staffing updates for the Infrastructure Services Department, including the Infrastructure Administrator moving into a Development Coordinator position and the hiring of the new Director. On the operational side, the quarter was bookended by two extreme weather events, being the seasonal drought, which extended into October and saw the town providing water to this Central Coast Regional District into about mid-October, and also the extreme high tide and rainfall event in December 27th, which resulted in callouts from Public Works on a stat holiday, and also saw the highest flows ever recorded into the wastewater treatment plant. So operationally, that was a very challenging day, but our crew was able to get through it, and we're on the other side now. So thank you, and I'll take any questions that Mayor and Council may have.
Okay, questions? Councillor Kroll?
Thank you, Mayor White, and thank you for your report. It's, like, as Mayor White said, the reports have been great, and I think it's reflected in the few questions that are coming forward. With respect to the weather events that occurred on, particularly with respect to the high tides and the rain we had in conjunction with them, there were some temporary measures done to prevent infiltration of water to the sewer trunk. Is there, I know we're talking about, we've applied for funding for upgrading, but is there any other sort of temporary measure that we might look at other than just sandbagging them? And the reason I ask this is, having walked the seawalk, particularly in the evening when there wasn't lighting, the sandbags in place without any sort of hazard cones or anything, they were potentially hazardous. I hope there weren't any incidents around them, but I'm just wondering if there's something that might be a little more effective and less a potential trip hazard that we might come up with in future till we acquire funding to come up with Plan B.
Through you as mayor, thank you for raising that concern. I'll certainly take note of that. The action that was taken that seemed to have had the most apparent impact on the amount of inflow coming specifically from the tide side was there was a sewer connection, private sewer connection that was damaged, and so there was an open 4-inch pipe that below the high tide line, which during that king tide event was just pulling water into the system. That was addressed, that was observed, I want to say about a week after the high tide event. It was noticed that that was damaged and it was capped and repaired by the private owner. And since then, the flows into the wastewater treatment plant have dramatically reduced. That seemed to have been the main source of the inflow into the system. Having said that, the sandbagging, I think now with the highest of the high tides behind us, that's certainly something that we can look at having removed. I'll have to speak to Public Works about that. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Thompson?
Thank you for such a thorough report. With respect to the urban forest plan, will they be presenting that separately from the Diamond Head DPA 2? Just wondering if there's a time frame that they'll be delivering that urban forest plan.
To you as mayor, thank you for the question. I'll have to check with staff about the timing for that project. As I was just getting on board in Q4, I'm kind of getting up to speed with all the projects. So I'm not sure exactly what the schedule is for that one. So
Yeah, okay. My question was really driven to, they're doing the DPA 2 as well, but would it be coming with the DPA 2 or is it going to still stand alone as its own report? So that's my only question.
I'll defer to the Director of Planning.
Through the mayor. So they are two separate projects, but they are the same consultant, so they are collecting the work for both the projects. I don't know what the timeline for the urban forest plan is, but we can try coordinate as best we can to bring that forward together if it makes sense. So we can coordinate with the mayor when we're putting the agendas together to deliver together, if the timing works out. So yeah, we'll have to look into that though.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Dianjadi?
Thank you. Yeah, that's on the same note of the urban forest plan. I remember that the urban forest plan had many phases. So would this include phase 1 or I think that it had at least 3 phases, right, initially? And one of the phases was to collect biodiversity data, right? So I have actually spoken with our CAO because in the DPA, they talk about not being able, just because of the funding, it was just a $40,000 awarded for the DPA 2, that they wouldn't be able to do a comprehensive wildlife research. But since it is on our schedule to do a biodiversity conservation, I wonder if we could increase maybe the funding or create some synergy, because if they will be collecting data for wildlife, it wouldn't make sense that they come back a year later or something to collect more. I'm just thinking if this could be attained. And now I didn't know that they're also gonna do the urban forest plan, which I think is really good to create this synergy. But I'm just hoping that there's even more synergy.
Through the mayor, so that would change the scope of what the RFP was put out for. So if there were any change of scope, then there would be a process to change the contract with Diamond Head. But in terms of collecting the biodiversity information and the wildlife corridor information, that's all within scope, and that information would feed into the urban forest strategy.
Okay, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask a question about chlorination of water, because and I think it's something I'm going to have to get used to, especially as some areas of town are chlorinated temporarily and then taken away. But now I found during the election campaign, but also everywhere I go now, people go, "Is our water being chlorinated again?" And so, like, the latest was, I think, in Zone 2 in like Gibsons Way area. I was asked about that a couple weeks ago, and all I ever say is that, my understanding is the town always sends out notifications when chlorination's about to happen. So because of when it does have to happen due to various works that are going on usually. So to my awareness, it wasn't, and that's kind of what I always go to. But has there been any extra chlorination of water in zones 2 or 1?
Through you, as mayor, I was not aware of any chlorination that would have happened in recent months. I do know that our crew has chlorinated in preparation for doing some maintenance work at the School Road Reservoir. And I believe that work started yesterday, and there may have been a missed communication around that. So that's acknowledged that I believe that chlorination started on Monday, so yesterday, and that was, so I think there was a misstep on our side as far as not communicating that in advance. So we'll have communication going on that there is chlorination happening, and that is for the reason of maintenance to the reservoir. But typically, chlorination in zone 1 and 2 would only occur when there's maintenance to the system that would require the disinfection.
Yeah, as long as people know, I think there's a general understanding out there that sometimes the water does get chlorinated because of work like that going on, I think, for most people. But yeah, I did have that question a couple weeks ago of someone who has sworn that they were tasting chlorine in their water, but it doesn't sound like that could have been. Yeah.
Not to my knowledge.
Councillor D'Andrade.
Thank you, Mayor. This regards water, but water consumption is we don't have the report since 2019, the website, and I wonder, I'm not sure if this is just a matter of putting the data on the website, or if there's some work that has to be done to compile this data.
This has been asked before, so I think the CIO may be aware of this.
I think, sorry, Michelle's not here at the moment, but I have to follow up with you on that. Oh, yeah, sorry. We've got that data, there's some calculation that needs to head there, 'cause I think we've got a difference between household amounts and individual amounts of per person consumption. But I'm aware of the website piece, so I'll have to follow up with that. I can't remember at the time, but at the moment, I should say.
Okay, I wanted to ask about White Tower Park too, how it would sure be nice to see that work getting going again. Is there any update on where that's at?
Through you as mayor, we have been in contact with Urban Systems about that project. The design is 99% complete. We're contemplating the best approach for initiating construction given the archaeological components to the site. Contemplating whether the archaeological work, if it were completed in advance of issuing the tender for construction, if that would lower the risk to contractors bidding on the job, which would thereby lower the prices. Inherently, the more risk that contractors are carrying, the more likely they are to inflate their prices to address that risk. So we've been in contact with Squamish Nation and local archaeological consultants for kind of scope and pricing. And we are determining the best way to address the procurement services for the archaeological work, as well as the tendering and the sequencing of everything. So that's work we're currently actively working on this week, with the intention of moving forward, ideally to be tendering the project later this month or in March. With construction, I would say, would be starting in the summer.
So this would be even more archaeological. I mean, the main reason it's been delayed for a year has been archaeological.
Correct. So
Right? But this,
that's correct. So through you as mayor, the archaeological work that was completed, it was an archaeological and AIA, so archaeological impact assessment. That work was completed by in situ consultants, and they identified that on the site there were some materials of archaeological significance, and there were some areas within the construction site that were identified that required further archaeological screening to ensure that any culturally sensitive or significant materials was screened and removed from the site. That work needs to happen in advance of construction. And so that field work is what is being coordinated right now in collaboration or in consideration of the timing sequencing with that work and the construction of the actual pond.
okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Kroll?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Back to White Tower Park, I know originally I think we'd budgeted just under $1 million for that, and I noticed the figures up because of obviously the length that the project has been delayed. Is there any opportunity to seek any additional funding? Because it was originally grant money that we acquired for this project. Has any other funding opportunity been sought for in light of the increased costs?
Through you as mayor, I would have to defer to the director of finance or the CAO. I believe with the CAO here, you may have something.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so I think last year council added some additional funds to that project on top of the $955,000 that we got as a grant. We'll have to see where the tender sits. This archaeological work that Trevor is talking about, it's a bit of an investment on our part to try and save money later, removing the uncertainty. But ultimately will be a tender that will tell us where we sit. We, at the moment, have no reason to believe that our funds aren't going to be sufficient. So we'll wait and see on that.
Okay, and I saw a hand in the audience up. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. A couple more questions. Sorry about this infrastructure here. Two questions. One is just, during the dialogue session we mentioned, some people mentioned this, and I don't live within the area of the water treatment plant. But the odor problem is, it's been around since I moved here 20 years ago. And I guess seems to be, I know it's not dangerous to breathe, but I certainly know that it's pretty obnoxious in the summertime. Is there anything I can't see in this report, anything about it? And I know it's a touchy subject. It's one we want to go away. But is there anything planned? I remember it's Tyler? Yeah, no, Trevor. Sorry, Trevor. I remember him saying something through you, Mr. Mayor, about what the problem is. He knows what the problem is. So is there any way of tackling it?
Yeah, I'll touch on some of the question and pass it on, but I think the reason it's not in the report is because, as you say, it's been around 20 years. It's kind of, unfortunately, it's something, I do live in the neighborhood, and it doesn't directly come to my house, but whenever I go for a walk, sometimes I notice it, as I did this morning. But it is something that we've all kind of become used to in some respects. But and I'd like to reframe the question a little bit, because we did learn recently from the director that there could be a budget. There could be an upgrade to the plant or a change to the plant that is in the list but it's not top of the list, because there are some essential changes, upgrades that need to be made that we looked at in our capital budget already. Now, he didn't have it in front of him at the dialogues, of course. I don't know if he does now either, but I think it was something that might be a few years off still on the current schedule, but could always be moved up by council. However, I don't know if that's, so that'd be part of the question. Do we have an update on where that is? But I'm also wondering about the viability of the upgrade too, because I thought I heard this would have been a year or two ago when I wasn't on council, that it wasn't 100% sure fix, which I think would be a concern for council, to invest a lot of money in something that may not even fix the problem, and it's something that we'll all have to consider at this table if that's true. And then thirdly, sorry to pile on all the questions, but I can get back to them if there's too many. Is there anything operationally that can be done to reduce is it just a way of the plant running? And I know that's also not a surefire fix, but could it be? Is there any way the plant's running that by the staffing we have on that can at least alleviate the odor?
Thank you. Through you as mayor, I think I've got the questions down. So there was a question about the timing of when the funding's approved or committed, and then certainty around the fix, and then if there's anything operationally that we can do. If I have the questions, okay. So through you as mayor, the timing of that, at that community dialogue session, I believe I said it would be 2025, and that was confirmed. That was the date that the odor control improvements were included in the preliminary sanitary capital plan that was presented in late January. There is a portion of money, relatively small, but enough to maybe do a little bit more analysis, that it was carried over from the money from 2022 for the odor control study portion of the work. I believe that our operators have, through working with the engineers, identified a potential opportunity that might be a more cost-effective way to address some of the odor in one of the buildings. And so I think that the intention is to earmark that money to pursue that option. As far as the certainty goes, I think that I haven't had any conversations personally with the engineers that were involved with that odor control study, so I'm speaking through second, third-hand information, so I don't want to say too much without being able to confirm that. But I have heard that, I think it stands to reason that there is an inherent level of uncertainty around it, given what it is that we're dealing with, where it's odor, which, it's airborne, so it's very elusive. And there are also there will be, regardless of what improvements there will be times where odor is present through the nature of what the process is. It's an inherently odorous process. It's treating wastewater. What goes in, there's just some inherent odor around it. So the tanks there will be some smell present with that. The most noxious odors are coming from two of the rooms, the process rooms. That's where the improvements would be focused to eliminate the intensity of the odors. But there are also times where doors are opened as operators are coming in and out of the facilities during the summer when the heat is high. They may have the door open longer than they might in the winter. There's also when the concentrated sludge, which is at the end of the treatment process, is removed from site, that gets hauled away in a bin by truck. And that process is without any other method of disposing of the solids. That's the method that's available to us. And so there will be smell around that, and that at this point in time is would open a bigger question as far as the treatment process, as far as dealing with that specific odor. But the consistent day-to-day odor, that is an issue of dealing with ventilation out of 2 of the buildings, and that's what the effort would be focused on. But I don't want to send any kind of false hope that it's going to be odorless at the end of the project. And then operationally, I have had some conversations with our chief operator. There's one thing that he has indicated might, like, it's the theory of the science is the wastewater treatment is it might help with some of the odor. The issue is that the basically they would be running the tanks. There's 2, I'm not sure how familiar you as council are with the treatment process. There's 2 tanks where coming through the screening and the solids and stuff like that gets filtered out. It comes into 2 tanks where it settles over the coast, and that's where, or over the process, that's where most of the treatment happens through aeration. Our operators tend to run those at a lower volume so that there's more room in the tanks so that we can deal with events like the extreme tide event that we had or the extreme rainfall. Or if we have any issues with some of the kind of the post or the later in the treatment process equipment fails, we have the ability to retain wastewater that's coming into the system and be down operationally for, say, a few days, and then fill the tanks up and then treat with the effluent discharge. With the issue that we had with the centrifuge earlier this year, had we had the tanks running at their preferred level, we may have been able to get through that without having to pump out any sewage, and that could have saved the town some money there. So I think there's a balance between the kind of operational flexibility and then the potential impact on some of the odor. Now, again, that the most concentrated kind of noxious odor is not coming from those tanks. It's coming from the buildings where the concentrated sludge and solids are. So I don't know how much of an impact that would truly have, even if we were to operate that way. I realize that was kind of a long-winded answer, but I hope that I addressed your question at least.
It's a long-winded question. Thank you.
A long-standing
question. It is. Thank you. I know it's a dangerous one.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Director of Planning, it's the next report.
Thank you, Mayor. So this report is laid out a little bit differently than we have in the past. So we have on the first page 2022 quick facts summary. So I'll just go over those, and if you have any deeper dive questions, we can try and answer them. For the planning department, we had 1 staffing vacancy filled, so that was the planning and development administrator role. So that's filled with Lisa Evanson. We did 81 reports, public hearings and workshops in total to council in 2022. 93 development applications were received, which is a high number compared to previous years. 29 of those were temporary use permits, so a big chunk of those were from the residential guest accommodation regulations. And we brought in just over 130,000 in development application revenue. From the building department, we had 2 staffing vacancies filled, so both our chief building official and our level 1 building official positions were filled, which is wonderful. It's really nice to have a full team right now. 72 building permits applications were received. 66 of those building permits were for new housing units, and 30 dwelling units were granted occupancy, so people could move into homes. The building department brought in 352,500 in revenue, and the overall construction value was just over 24 million. And they also brought in 16,000 in plumbing inspection revenue. And for the bylaw enforcement team, we filled 1 vacancy, so the bylaw enforcement officer, and they received 336 bylaw complaints. They issued 579 business licenses, and they brought in 103,000 in business license revenue, and that's I think the highest we've received for a while. In terms of projects, so I've just provided a short blurb on the status of some of the projects. So under the residential guest accommodation regulations, I provided a summary on the applications and did a little evaluation against council's goals of the program. I won't go into that unless you want me to. Development permit areas number 1 and 2, so that's the geotechnical and environmental development permit area update. That the contract was awarded to Diamond Head Consulting and Horizon Engineering. We've had a kickoff meeting with Diamond Head to start that project, and we are waiting to have a kickoff meeting with Horizon Engineering. So they're currently looking at our LiDAR data. The development permit area number 9, that's the aquifer development permit area update. That is still under review. We've had a geotechnical review of the aquifer component, and I will be working very closely with our Director of Infrastructure Services to make sure what we want covered and protected is under the subdivision bylaw and the water regulation bylaw, in addition to the development permit areas. We applied for the grant for the active transportation plan, and we're supposed to hear next week formally whether we've gotten that. Planning worked with the Sunshine Coast Regional District on their regional growth baseline research project. So that's being presented to the SCRD board in Q1, so this quarter, so soon. And that talks about, it looks at where on the Sunshine Coast future growth can go, basically. And I'm not sure how that information is going to be used in the future, but it's good to look at a regional approach to where density should go on the coast and livability and that kind of thing. So there's a high-level summary of some of the projects we've worked on. Figure 1 shows an annual comparison of development applications we've received, and you can see here we're just going right up. We've just received so many development applications, so we are definitely very busy. And then we also added a new section on housing to break down what types of housing units we're receiving and what kinds of occupancies are being granted. And I will leave it there. We do have our chief building official and our senior bylaw officer in the audience if you have questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll look to council first for questions. Councillor D'Andrade.
Thank you. Yeah, my question regards DPA 9. Somehow I was expecting, just given the timing that the report was presented in quarter 2 of last year. And when, I know you spoke a little bit about it, but when do you think the bylaws would be in place? Is it something still a year ahead, or perhaps just a few months?
I think depending on how we move forward, there's probably going to be, I'm anticipating 3 bylaw amendments. So one would be to the water regulation bylaw, and another to the subdivision bylaw. Those bylaws could be adopted in 2 council meetings. The OCP, so the development permit area update itself, is an OCP amendment, so that would require a public hearing, and that would probably take longer. And it also depends on how much consultation you want to do on it. So that could draw out a process to a year.
Go ahead.
Clarify. I understand the timing, perhaps staff availability of doing the project review, the public hearing, but it's very technical anyway, so I don't think, I think my question, okay, so I understand the time of staff just to be able to organize, but do you have already all the information from Waterline, everything, just to insert in to change the bylaw, or there's still work?
Through the mayor, there is still work. So we do have a lot of information from Waterline, and we also have a review of that information from WSP. So now we are reviewing it, and there's still some back and forth that needs to happen. So we have most of the work in front of us, but there still might be a little bit more tweaking that has to happen before we can recommend approval of it.
Thank you. Looking for other questions? There's a lot of information in here. Yeah, I'll go to the audience.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to go to, I'm not sure it has a page, on the current DP's applications. And I'm going to take you to DP 2022. It's the George Hotel and Residences. And I'm just going to ask you, I can't quite understand this, but that application expired. And now I see it's here again. And it's a very old application. I mean, the original one was 2015, I believe. Now to 2023. That's 8 years. And a lot has changed with climate change, and this project needs a whole new design to suit our current, climate and future climate. So I'm just wondering if this is a reapplication. Is it just a reapplication and it doesn't have to go through the real application process? That's my question.
Yeah, I'm not aware that, I may need to be corrected on this. I'm not aware that applications really expire, especially when they haven't even come to council yet. But the permit, the permits do expire. I think when you're going back to 2015, that was a whole other process. That was a different permit. And yeah, I believe in this case, what you're talking about is the developer would need to reapply.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what's on the books here, is there's been a submission to reapply.
So when it's a reapplication, does it go through the same hoops as an application? Like, I guess I understand that the zoning is there.
Yeah.
So does this one go to a public hearing or anything?
It would really depend on what's in there, I think. I mean, if they're applying for further rezoning or something to that level, it would have to go to that extent. But
I don't see any rezoning, so I'm asking.
we haven't seen it yet, so it hasn't come before council.
I read the stuff online, so I'm just saying it's a bit of a tweak, they call it. Okay, so then my question, I guess you've answered my question in that it doesn't have to be a whole new application.
Oh, it's a whole new application. I'll go to the planning for that. Yeah, it's certainly a whole new application. Yeah.
Thank you, through the mayor. So they have submitted new applications. Some of their permits have expired, so they need to apply, and we would process it like we would a new application. In this case, they're tweaking it a little bit, so we would present what has changed since the original application. But there is no zoning amendment application, so there would be no public hearing for this process.
So how will we, the community, be able to put it, like we can't ask questions in council meetings, I appreciate today. How does the public know this is happening?
It will be on, if it moves forward. I understand the developer's been expressed some interest in getting on an agenda at some point, but a lot needs to be ready before that point on on their end, and staff work needs to be done to make sure it's ready to come to council. Then it would be on council, it would be public, it would be known to the public that it's coming to council, and we would expect a flood of input. I'll speak for myself, I'm going to expect a flood of input for and against any project like that, just like we've seen in the past.
Well, a community dialogue might be good for it too. Thank you.
Thanks for the suggestion. Other questions? Councillor DeAndretti?
Thank you. Just the status of Gospel Rock, Green Lane. I couldn't get from here.
Yeah, good question.
So we had a servicing agreement signed with them, so we are waiting for them to sign their servicing agreement and pay their portion before they proceed. We did have a meeting with them last week, and they said that they were planning to proceed. So we're still waiting, but they indicated they were interested in proceeding with some work.
Councillor Thompson?
Thank you for the breakdown in the housing occupancies. That was really helpful information to be able to see that table. That was really informative. Thank you. And my one question is, in regards to the STRs, what are the current bylaw fines? How is that? What are the amounts? Yeah, I'm not aware of what the amounts are or how that is being formulated.
I know someone in the room is well aware of it. How's your hand?
So we commenced enforcement on February the 1st, and what we're doing right now is solely looking at the existing listings and figuring out if someone has an application or it's completed or it's in progress. So the fines at the present time are being issued for marketing without a license. So if they have a current listing, so we're checking every week. If the listing's there and there's been no communication, we are issuing fines. So we started off with 22 on the 1st of February, 22 on the 7th, and 13 this morning. The fine is $200.
$200 for?
Marketing without a license.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
So those multiple people who are getting fined, they're being fined daily. So
Not at this time. No, we're doing weekly.
Okay.
Just to commence.
Oh, right, yeah.
We are finding it is getting people's attention.
that one makes more sense. Yeah, I see.
So every week we're getting less because people are then reaching out to us, which is what we wanted. Yeah. And then at that time we're reconsidering the fine that was issued if they're going to work with us to obtain a license or remove the listing.
But there are some people, there are evidently 13.
12 right now.
12 now that are digging in and accepting $600 in fines now, and they're still going.
They have not communicated with us at all.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds like fun. more is coming. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And any other questions? Councillor Andretti.
Just want to make a comment with overall the reports. I think there was a up, really appreciated. The cleanup and really more succinct, but the information is there, so very good. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
If there's anything else you note, please let us know.
Yeah, there's a lot of information in here, so I definitely encourage councillors to go back to this report, to look things up, and also to, if there's any follow-up questions, just send them through and we'll share them with staff and get the answers.
And I also really appreciate I still say STR, and I have to think RGA, I guess, RGA. Because obviously it makes it easier, right? When you read, it's just there, right? So, yeah. So I think this is a good way of going about, instead of lumping with the bylaws or something, right? Because it's a program, and I appreciate having already the evaluation going on. So that's what I was looking for, and it's here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So we now have a recommendation for a motion to close, and that would be that the meeting be closed in accordance with sections 91E, negotiation for property interest of the community charter, acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements if the council considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality. I'm just looking for a mover for that. Moved by Councillor Kroll, seconded Councillor Dianjadi. All those in favor of the motion? The motion carries. So we'll close, and I think we'll just have a 10-minute break, council, before we. Go grab lunch in 10 minutes. 2:50. Link.